all kinds of issues related to criminal justice in the great state of Maryland as we face a primary this coming Tuesday, July 19th. I know a lot of folks don't make the effort to get up and go out and vote in the primary. I'm telling you, it's incredibly important to do so as an activist and advocate. The issues that we care about are moved by policies that basically are come to us through politicians. And so we have to be involved in the political process. So tonight I'm being joined by John King and Michelle Siri, who I just yesterday publicly endorsed for governor and lieutenant governor of Maryland, and I was so honored to do so. And I want to start off by asking John to please introduce yourself.
Sure. Well, thank you. And thank you so much for your support. Um, my name is John King. I served as Secretary of Education for President Obama, and I'm proud to be running for governor of Maryland. I've spent my life as an educator, focused on trying to advance equity in education and social justice more broadly. And I'm excited for tonight's conversation.
Thank you so much. And Michelle, if you don't mind introducing yourself.
Absolutely. And yeah, thank you, Rabia, not only for the endorsement and for being here tonight, but for the work that you've done out in the community. I am a women's rights advocate. I've spent about 20 years of my career now advocating for everything from economic security, physical safety, to bodily autonomy. I'm the former board president of Planned Parenthood of Maryland and the Maryland Legislative Agenda for Women. I currently am an appointed member of the Maryland Equal Pay Commission, and I run the Women's Law Center of Maryland. And I'm incredibly grateful and honored to be here running for Lieutenant Governor with John King.
Amazing. I mean, the work both of you have done, I am just so in awe of it, and the dedication you've shown throughout your lives and careers to the issues that matter to so many progressives, just that thank you for all your work. Tonight, though, we're going to focus a little more closely on the issues that people know me most well for, and that is criminal justice reform, criminal justice issues, the systematic issues, especially in Maryland. But my work outside of the Adnan Syed case has extended across the country, and I have gotten the opportunity to see how, especially wrongful convictions is my kind of the area I focus on, but how all of it plugs together in the intersectionality of it, and state by state, the kinds of challenges that defendants face. Now, one of the concerns I've had lately is that a lot of the conversation on criminal justice reform and public safety seems to me to be kind of swinging back towards tough on crime talk. Now, that's something a lot of us grew up with. In the last few years, we had seen like a bit of a shift where people are realizing that the tough on crime position, how it led to just mass incarceration and egregious sentencing and the school to prison pipeline. But I'm seeing this shift like back towards that in incrementally, but it's happening definitely even among Democrats, and this is very troubling to me. So, John and Michelle, you both have on your website, a pretty broad plan for criminal justice reform, and you talk also about something called the Police Plus plan. So, I want you to talk a little bit about how does your plan push back on this tough on crime position, and where does the Police Plus plan plug into it? Because it could look like that to some folks.
Well, I thank you for framing the question this way, Rabia. I worry a lot that in this Democratic primary for governor in Maryland, we've heard a lot of rhetoric that seems like it's from time travel, just taken straight out of the 90s tough on crime era. And a lot of folks who are talking about policing as the only dimension through which they look at issues of public safety. And Michelle and I have been making the argument that that is wrong, that is a mistake, that is what led us down the path of mass incarceration, that instead we have to look at public safety issues holistically. And yes, there's a role for police focused on investigating violent crime and stopping the flow of illegal guns, but there's so many other pieces that are missing. So that's our policing plus argument, that there's a role, but it's the plus that we haven't been doing. Consider that in Baltimore is number 3 or 4 in the country for per capita police, the number of police per citizen. And yet there are still challenges. So if policing alone was the solution, there wouldn't be a problem. We need to do other things. We need to invest in mental health services. We need to invest in addiction treatment. We need to invest in violence prevention and violence interruption programs like Safe Streets. We need to invest in reentry and changing our whole approach to incarceration as a country so that folks are getting education and job training and mental health services while incarcerated, and then getting support, finding a job and housing when they come home. 95% of the folks who are incarcerated are coming home. It's in everyone's interest for them to have support in making that transition. We need rec centers and summer jobs programs for teens and apprenticeship programs for young people who are disconnected from school and work. But what's happened is we've put all our eggs in the policing and criminal justice basket, and that's not enough to achieve actual public safety with healthy communities. And more broadly, and then Michelle, you should add, but more broadly, we put forward a One Baltimore plan because a lot of the focus of this conversation has been on Baltimore, arguing that we also have to think about housing and public transportation and education and economic development if we're serious about advancing public safety.
Can I dig a little bit deeper with you on that, John? There's a big concern, and I think this concern exists even among Democrats with the idea of like defunding the police and what that actually looks like and means. But it seems like what you're proposing is not defunding the police, but properly funding the services that would support public safety, right?
That's right. That's right. What we've done as a country is we've defunded programs for kids. We've defunded programs for folks who are struggling with addiction. We've defunded programs for violence prevention, and we're paying the consequences of that. And so we've really got to think differently about how we allocate resources.
And I would just add, John talked about it a little bit about what the proper role of police are. In Maryland right now, over half of the gun crimes are committed with guns that have been brought into the state illegally. In Baltimore City, it's about 75% or more. And so we think that the police should be focusing their time and resources on stopping that illegal flow of guns, on addressing the backlog of sexual assault rape kits that they have not been going after. I work with survivors of intimate partner violence and sexual assault, and they have so many challenges just getting their cases even looked at. And then it's the violent crime and reducing or lowering the murder clearance rate. That's where we think that the focus should be from the policing aspect, so that we can then shift our priorities and look at the policing plus.
John, your background is as an educator. Can you talk a little bit about how you envision the role of the police in schools?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I started out as a high school social studies teacher and middle school principal. It's been my whole life in education, and came to it really because of the role schools played in my life. When I was a kid, both my parents passed away when I was little. My mom when I was 8, my dad when I was 12. In the period when it was just my dad and me, my dad was struggling with Alzheimer's. School was my safe haven, but then as a teenager, I struggled the way a lot of young people who've experienced trauma struggle. I got in a lot of trouble, and I actually got kicked out of high school. And I always point out to folks that I was blessed that there were teachers and a school counselor who gave me a second chance. But in a different context, I could easily have been fed into the school to prison pipeline. And that's really why I am very concerned about the presence of armed police officers in schools. The evidence is really quite overwhelming that when you have armed police officers in schools, arrests of kids go up, suspensions and expulsions go up, and safety doesn't improve. Now, it's one thing to have school security staff who work for the school district who see themselves as part of the educational institution. It's quite different to have an armed police officer who's trained to make arrests and to approach kids and families with that orientation. So our argument has been, let's put our resources into counselors, not cops. Let's make sure that we are creating safe and supportive school environments with adequate school counselors and mental health services and training for teachers and administrators of how to be trauma informed in their approach. Let's not go down this path of feeding the school to prison pipeline.
Yeah. And Michelle, I want to ask you, I mean, And I believe this is true for much of your career, but certainly now, I mean, given like, when you introduce yourself, much of the work you do involve is gender focused work. Can you talk to me a little bit about like what is the intersection of the criminal justice system you see with your work? I mean, you
Oh,
talked a little bit about talk a little bit about representing survivors, but beyond that.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, the work that I do, for example, with survivors of intimate partner violence, they all come to us at the Women's Law Center where we provide legal services, for example. They come to us with other needs, right? They come to us needing housing, affordable childcare. They all need economic security, economic dignity. And many of them also, because they are survivors of trauma, get caught up in the trauma to prison pipeline, frankly. And so the intersectionality there is very clear about how all of these different systems play for gender justice. And so there's a lot of different ways that we can work. One is addressing that trauma to prison pipeline, making sure that we have the resources for survivors. Another one is within the incarcerated system itself. Women who are incarcerated, women are currently being incarcerated at a much higher rate in Maryland than ever before, and nationwide at a higher rate than men. And we need to have special resources in place to address the different needs that they have. A one-size-fits-all doesn't work within our prison system. And so I've been active a lot in issues, especially for incarcerated mothers. We need to make sure that we are providing resources and programs to keep the children and the mothers together as long as possible, and to better their labor delivery system. They have been proven to improve not just the health of the children and the long-term outcomes of the children, but also for the mothers themselves. It reduces addiction and mental health challenges, reduces recidivism, and helps them reacclimate when they are returning citizens a great deal better. And so those are some of the areas that I've been trying to focus on and advocate for. And it is an area that, unfortunately, a lot of times feminists, and in particular white feminism, has left out of that conversation. And we have to recognize that if we're going to be feminists, we need to be intersectional, and we need to include incarcerated individuals in that conversation for sure.
I want to follow up, and this is a little bit off script, I know, but it is something that heavily on the minds of many women in this country right now, given recent rulings from SCOTUS and your work with Planned Parenthood. I mean, the connection there, people like me are thinking about what does this mean for women in terms of like criminality, incarceration, things like can you guys talk a little bit about your what you plan to do to protect women's rights to choose and to protect them from the criminal justice system in the event they have to exercise that right?
John, do you want to start?
Sure. So, look, we have been, I think, the most aggressive across the Democratic field in saying that it's not good enough to just be pro-choice in this moment. One has to be committed to making Maryland the North Star for access to abortion care, which is health care. So a few things we think we should do immediately, and we've put out a 100-day plan for what we think we would want to get done immediately. We need a constitutional amendment to protect the right to abortion in Maryland. Right now, it's a statutory protection. That is vulnerable to changes in the politics, so we need to put that into the Constitution. We need to commit funding to the training of providers. Today, 2/3 of our counties don't have abortion service providers, and we're already seeing women coming to Maryland for care, including from West Virginia, which closed their last clinic almost immediately after the court decision. So we've got to train a supply of providers. Governor Hogan's holding up funding that the General Assembly committed. Now, ideally, I'd love the General Assembly to come into special session to act on both the constitutional amendment and the funding for training. The leadership has said they don't plan to do that. I think that's a mistake, but we would immediately, upon taking office, make sure those two things move forward. We also think we need to have protections for providers in Maryland who are providing care to pregnant people coming from other states. And we need to have protections for those who come to Maryland seeking abortion care against these deeply problematic laws in red states. So we've got to put in place those added legal protections. Otherwise, we're going to end up going down the road of something that looks a lot like, the Fugitive Slave Act, of the 19th century, where states are trying to encroach on other states' sovereignty to try to enforce their deeply problematic laws.
And to build on that, we need to make sure that we're working within state agencies so that we're not cooperating with extradition. We need to prioritize patient privacy right now more than ever. We've been really good in Maryland. Every year with the Women's Law Center, we have stood up and we have opposed legislation that would try and require reporting requirements on abortion issues. Every year we get this fight back about what does it matter? It doesn't really matter. Clearly now we are seeing why it's so very important. And, there was legislation this past year that we supported as well, that Delegate Nicole Williams had put forth, that was to protect pregnant women in general, because we're seeing that not only is it folks who are seeking an abortion, but it's folks who are helping others seek an abortion, or folks who've experienced a miscarriage. We've already seen in Maryland, there have been a number of cases that at the very least, investigations and prosecutions began before other parties intervened and made sure that that didn't go any further. But it was investigating women who had had a miscarriage and trying to prosecute them in a variety of different ways. And then finally, when it comes to providers, we need to make sure that we're preventing their licenses from being taken away from them. We're already seeing in Ohio, for example, there was the young 10-year-old girl who was raped, and she couldn't get an abortion in Ohio because she was 3 days past, her pregnancy was 3 days past the 6-week waiting period. So she went to Indiana. Well, the Ohio Attorney General is now investigating the doctor in Indiana. We need to absolutely be protecting folks like that doctor who did her job and saved a life. And so I think those are priorities that we absolutely have to have in place.
Great. Thank you so much for indulging me on that little bit of departure from what we were here to talk about. But it's something that's, weighing heavily on the minds of a lot of us and hearts of a lot of us. So I want to move forward. You have a really solid forward-looking criminal justice, reform policy plan. My work is with the people who already are incarcerated. And so my question to you is, what is your administration going to be able to do for those who are incarcerated?
Look, I think we have to think about incarceration totally differently as a society. In the United States, we have had an approach that is focused almost exclusively on the idea of punishment, as opposed to focusing on helping folks get their lives on track. And so one of the things I worked on when I was Secretary of Education was an initiative called Second Chance Pell. And this is a good illustration of this issue. In the 90s, in the era of tough on crime and a punitive mindset, Congress banned access to Pell Grants, the main federal assistance for higher education for folks who are incarcerated. When they banned that Pell access in the 94 crime bill, programs providing prison education closed all over the country. Overnight, I talked to one woman who was incarcerated at the time. She said the guards came, took the books out of the library and said, "You won't need these anymore." And this is crazy. 95% of people are coming home. This makes no sense. So in the Obama administration, we wanted to restore Pell Grant access. We had a Republican Congress that wasn't willing to do that. So we used our flexibility under the Higher Education Act to create a pilot project allowing 65 colleges and universities to use Pell Grants for students who are incarcerated, including Goucher here in Maryland. That program then became a tool for advocacy. And when I left the administration, took over a civil rights organization, we partnered with other civil rights and criminal justice reform organizations to get members of Congress to visit those programs, to talk with students, to get governors to visit those programs, to speak at graduations. And ultimately, we were able to change the law. And in December 20, Congress repealed that misguided ban on Pell Grant access. But this is why I say we have to shift our focus. We have to say, how do we help people who enter with addiction issues? How do we help them get substance treatment? Folks who enter having experienced tremendous trauma, how do we make sure they get mental health services? Folks who need educational programs, whether that's literacy, high school diploma, college, graduate school, how do we make sure that folks get educational opportunity? And then we need reentry support so that folks can find jobs and housing. And we have to get rid of collateral consequences that essentially, as Michelle Alexander powerfully describes in The New Jim Crow, these collateral consequences lock people in to a permanent caste. we have to get rid of those collateral consequences and say when you come home, you need to be able to get a job, get housing. We shouldn't have anything that causes your conviction to be an obstacle to getting your life back on track.
I'd like to add too, there's some issues of basic human dignity that we don't always talk about. And one area, for example, is that we need to push for better treatment of incarcerated transgender individuals. It's something that we don't really talk about much. And nearly 1 in 6 transgender Americans has been incarcerated. And if they're Black, it's going to be 1 in 2 transgender individuals. And so the policies that are in place are discriminatory. Sexual assaults are very constant and real threats for these people in prison. And we are currently housing and treating folks by sex assigned at birth. They're 13 times more likely to be sexually assaulted in those scenarios. Right. And so the best thing for everybody, for the whole system, is to reduce that types of violent crime. And it's going to be done by not segregating folks, which is what we do in best case scenarios now. Worst case is we just let it be and let the violence play out. Best case scenario, we segregate folks. But what we should be doing is housing them according to their gender identity. And this has been done in the UK for over a decade, and it works very successfully there. And it's shown to reduce crime or violence in general within the incarceration system. And so I think that's just another area, much like incarcerated women that I talked about earlier, that we're not addressing those specific needs, and we're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, and it's not going to work.
So, I mean, so Michelle, you're saying that your administration would be looking at trying to actually change the policy on where to house transgender people.
There was legislation this past year in Annapolis, and I think we would be supporting that because it clearly has a positive effect, not just on the incarcerated individual, but on the system as a whole.
Is there any part of your platform, just kind of curious, that addresses sentencing issues in Maryland?
Well, on a couple levels. I mean, one is trying to rethink how we approach youth justice, where in Maryland we have a terrible track record of sending young people who've made sometimes awful mistakes, but they're young people, and we're sending them into our adult court system, and they are being treated as adults rather than thinking of them as children for whom we have to have a plan for how we help them get their lives back on track. And I've testified on a series of bills, including eliminating that practice of having so many charges that are automatically charged in adult prison. So reforming youth sentencing and the whole youth criminal justice system is critical. We have also talked about creating a system of reviewing folks who have had wrongful convictions or wrongful sentences, and creating a state office within the governor's office that would be tasked with reviewing those cases, that would engage advocates, formerly incarcerated folks, folks who have real expertise, who've been involved, as you have, Rabia, in things like the Innocence Project. And I'm hopeful that you will join us in helping to lead that effort. But we need to make sure that we have a criminal justice system with true integrity, and that means there has to be a route to review wrongful convictions and wrongful sentencing.
Just for folks who might not be aware, we have around 20,000 incarcerated people in the state of Maryland, and it's hard to know exactly how many people have been wrongfully convicted. And certainly people are wrongfully convicted for all kinds of different levels of crime, whether it's, misdemeanors or murders and felonies. But even conservative estimates would probably put us at maybe around 1,000 people in Maryland. We don't hear 1,000 cases in Maryland, right? Like nobody knows about 1,000 or even 500, even 100. But they have to exist because the data just bears that out, that there's at least, a few hundred who are certainly wrongfully convicted. And for people might not understand that, the capacity of innocence projects, which are the kind of private organizations or usually with universities, is very low. They can maybe take a few, maybe 5 or 6 cases a year. And there's only 2 counties there's only two states attorney's offices in the state. There are conviction and sentencing integrity review units, which is like what it's called when the state sets up something that as you are proposing. And I cannot tell you how much that means to somebody who does the work I do, because when a defendant is trying to prove their innocence in the court system, it takes an average of 20 plus years to exonerate them. But having a mechanism outside of the court system where you have a governor's department or commission or an organization like this that would accept applications from people and review their cases for either wrongful conviction or even egregious sentencing and malicious prosecution, things like that, it can cut down that process by decades, not even years, but decades. And so, I am incredibly excited to hear about this. Not a lot of states have done this, but some have, and they've been very successful. And it's very, very important part of this bigger piece of criminal justice reform. So thank you guys so much for that. Yeah. All right. My final question before we move on to audience questions, and this is my final question for you. And this is, really shocking to people when they're told this, because nobody really expects it from the blue state of Maryland. But Maryland has the highest incarceration rate for Black men, one of the highest incarceration for Black men in the country, maybe even the highest. I can't remember, but literally, like it's just we are ranking on a scale we don't want to be on. So how will your administration break the cycle?
Yeah, I mean, people are often shocked to hear, that our rate of incarceration of young Black men is higher than Alabama, higher than Mississippi, right? The places that people usually think of as having these deep systemic problems, we've got them. We've got those deep systemic problems. I think it's all the things we've talked about, right? It's reforming our approach to public safety, to be more holistic, less focused on over-policing and over-incarceration. It's reforming our approach to incarceration to give people an opportunity to get their lives on track, and reforming our approach to reentry. There are also some fundamental changes that are needed to our laws. We have been supportive of the legalization of cannabis. That is an important step for the state to take. We then have to expunge the records of people who have cannabis-related convictions, and we have to create an industry in Maryland in which Black and Latino business owners can actually participate, and a diverse set of business owners can actually participate in the industry that emerges. We also, I think, need to create more opportunity for folks. One of the frustrations when you have someone like Governor Hogan come out and do his gimmick, his refund the police gimmick, one of the frustrations, in addition to the fact that nobody's defunded the police, and so it's just a gimmick and false, one of the frustrations is he canceled the Red Line project, which would have connected poorer neighborhoods in the city with where their jobs are. So if folks are struggling and end up involved in criminal activity because they couldn't get a good job, well, he's been complicit in that by canceling the very project that would have created the possibility for economic opportunity.
Yeah. Michelle, did you want to add anything to respond to that question?
I think John's really hit on a lot of it, because it does come down to making sure that it's a systemic issue, right? And so we need to be working with all of the different levels of our government. We need to be pushing the legislature. There have been some good movement and good progress there, but not enough. They haven't had that push to really get us over the line. And I think that's what it's going to take to get us there.
So Michelle, the first audience question that we have is actually directed towards you. So I'm just going to read this as it has come in. Can you talk about the need for better reentry program for women, including Maryland's lack of women's only pre-release centers?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great question. And I mentioned earlier, nationwide and in Maryland, women are being incarcerated at a higher rate than men. And yet they have historically been an afterthought when it comes to prison reform. In Maryland, there are, I believe, 9 reentry programs across the state for men, and there have been 0 for women. And it was a very hard-fought battle that a lot of advocates were involved in. I was happy that we played a small supporting role in making sure it was there, but it was really, it had to be brought by impacted individuals. And so there are a lot of organizations out there that brought and fought for legislation that passed in 2020 to have one just one reentry program for women.
And just to be clear, what you're saying is a woman who is being released from incarceration up until now would not have even had access to the 9 existing programs.
So sometimes they might get a little bit of the, well, here, but not really, because those programs are elsewhere. So they would try and like, let's do a little makeshift, but generally speaking, yes, there's no services out there for women. And the even worse, like to add insult to injury, was after that legislation was passed in 2020, the funding never came. And so the fight had to start all over again. But as I talked about, incarcerated women have different needs. Yeah. 2/3 of Maryland households have a woman as the primary, the or the sole breadwinner, right? There's a much higher rate of assault for women who are incarcerated than there are for men. And a much higher, as we talked about, percentage of them are victims of trauma. They're more likely to be incarcerated for nonviolent offenses and to spend less time incarcerated, which means that there's less time for them to get the services they need. And so that one size fits all approach just doesn't work. And so we need to make sure that we have trauma-informed care in our reentry systems. We need parenting and childcare support, and we need housing. I mean, that's really one of the biggest challenges. I mean, it's a challenge for men as well, but it's a different situation because the women have that added challenge of needing housing that will take their children ordinarily, because they are going to be disproportionately mothers and single mothers. And so we need to make sure that our reentry programs are addressing all of those needs and that they exist. I mean, at the bare bones, that they exist. And we are absolutely committed to making sure that funding is available.
Good, good. So John, the second question is for you, and I'm going to preface it by telling you a little bit about, for those folks who I have tried to lure here with talking about, because I did say I'm going to bring up Adnan's case. Adnan Syed is very well known now, not just in the country, but across the world. Millions are supporting his fight for exoneration. And when he was incarcerated, he was 17 years old, very, very bright young man, honor roll, had already been accepted to college. When he was incarcerated, like, he didn't have a single opportunity to pursue. He finished his high school degree, diploma, excuse me, when after he was incarcerated, and he was handed that in the prison, but he never ever got the chance to take a single college course for 23 years. Brilliant young guy, knows a lot about the world because he follows stuff online. He reads a lot, but he just never was given the chance. And it's only very recently, last year, that Georgetown University started something called the Prison Scholars Program, and he was lucky enough to be part of the first cohort, small cohort, like 20 odd, 20, 25 incarcerated men who are in this cohort. The opportunities for people who are incarcerated to get an education are really tough. And you talked about the Second Chance Pell program. Can you explain a little bit about how like that would work? How, like, just kind of what are the mechanics of that program working to allow somebody to get an education through it?
Yeah. Well, you're so right about the lack of educational opportunities. The many prisons in the United States, including the federal prison system, often the only educational programming available is a GED course that lets you get the equivalent of a high school diploma. That's not enough. It's a missed opportunity. And what we tried to do with Second Chance Pell was say the federal assistance that you can get as a student from a low-income background going to college, that federal assistance should be available to you while you are incarcerated. With that Pell Grant, then the university can afford to provide on-site educational experiences. And what we saw was tremendous interest from colleges and universities in Second Chance Pell, and tremendous support from not only civil rights groups and criminal justice reform organizations, but from the folks who run prisons, who said, we understand it is better if folks see a path to opportunity for themselves. And what we've seen from those programs is they're life-changing. They give folks access to educational opportunities that can then translate into better jobs when they come home. But they also shift the culture within the prison, because folks are positively engaged in those educational experiences. Now, you need the college or university to have a real commitment to a faculty member who takes seriously coming to understand some of the challenges students face and the things that they're balancing alongside their coursework. But I've visited many of these programs and they're transformative. Now, there are many folks, unfortunately, who are not able to do college work because they don't yet have a high school diploma or because they have significant academic needs. A disproportionate share of folks who are incarcerated are students with disabilities, folks with dyslexia that was never addressed, and so they struggle with even literacy. So we have to have an approach that provides appropriate educational programming so that folks who need the support to gain early literacy skills have that. Folks who need the support to get a high school diploma have that, and folks who want to pursue higher education have that opportunity. But there's a tremendous, I think, demand from folks who are incarcerated because folks see it as a path to improving their lives, improving their relationship with their family, improving their prospects when they come home. And ultimately, education is a part of having a good quality of life, is the opportunity to be learning. And we ought to embrace that.
And Rabia, can I ask you a question? I think you said that it was a cohort of 20 men. Is that?
Yeah, I did. 20, okay. Between 20 and 25.
But it was all men. And so, I mean, it just, and I think it sounds like a great program, but it did just strike me. And I was like, oh, and we were just talking about, women and
you caught that, yes.
Yeah, I did. Yeah. And, it just goes to show that there are, steps that we need to take in all of those areas.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I want to ask you guys, because, well, I know the answer to this, but I want you guys to make the case for why criminal justice reform should be important to everybody. Now, I try to explain to people, like, even if you look, the average person is going to be like, it's another community's issue. It's that neighborhood's thing. It's this, it doesn't really impact me. Why should the average person just even care about this issue if there's nobody in their life who's incarcerated, if they've never encountered the system? Why does this matter?
I make two observations. One is we ought to aspire to have a just society, and a society in which the criminal justice system is used to advance systemic racism, or where a criminal justice system is used to advance patriarchy, is not a just society. Yeah. And so we all have, I think, a moral responsibility to work to create a criminal justice system that is fair and where fundamental principles of due process are honored. And then the second piece is we all want to be safe. In every community, we want to be safe. And safe isn't just free from a horrible act of violence. Safe is feeling like you can walk to the store, go to the park, play with your kids, and feel confident that you're going to be able to enjoy quality of life. And to get there, we need a criminal justice system that is part of a holistic strategy for genuine public safety that helps folks whose lives have gotten off track, get them back on track. Yeah. We need an approach to public safety that helps to prevent violence before it occurs. I think about one of our supporters, Lori Charkoudian, who's a delegate in the General Assembly. She works on community mediation programs, including mediation programs working in prisons to help folks work out conflicts with family members, for example, while incarcerated, so that when they come home, there's less prospect that those conflicts will undermine their successful transition home or result in violence. That makes for a healthier and safer society.
Yeah. And Rabia, I'm going to just add to that. So I agree wholeheartedly with everything that John just said from that moral perspective, from wanting our society as a whole to be more just. But I hear folks saying what you're saying too, which is that it doesn't affect me. And I hear folks saying, well, why can't they just get a job, or why can't? Yeah. And these types of long-term solutions that John and I are proposing, I mean, yes, it's to make a more equitable system. It's to make, reduce the violence within our our incarcerated systems, but that has an effect on everybody. It's going to be better for our economy. It's going to be better if we can get folks who are currently incarcerated the education that they need. If we can get them the job trainings that they need, then they're going to come out and they're going to be able to get, housing and get employment. And then that's going to be better for, that's going to be even better for our tax base. It's really a long-term investment in our society as a whole, that if we're doing these things to promote that equity, that it's going to benefit the folks that think, it has nothing to do with that.
Yeah. I practiced immigration and civil rights law for about a decade before I started working on innocence stuff. And when I was practicing immigration, I began right around 9/11, a little bit before that. And I used to tell a lot of the immigrant communities that I work with that they should care about the criminal justice system. And they said, well, that's not, we have an immigration issue. We don't have that. And I said, but how do you think this stuff is enforced? So whether we're talking about immigration, whether we're talking about abortion, whether we're talking about your civil rights, this is the system that can take from you and enforce in ways that can hurt anybody. And so there's one final question from the audience that I want to pose, and then we're going to wrap up. And that's this, and this is kind of an important question. What are really the key differences between you, John and Michelle, and and then the other candidates on criminal justice reform?
Look, I'd frame the differences in two broad categories. One is we have a number of candidates in the Democratic field who are mimicking Governor Hogan's language around send in more police. We've got one opponent who talks about all the police he would hire and all the SROs he would put into every school building in the state. Yeah. And so it's a mindset that takes us, I think, in the wrong direction. And Michelle and I have been the clearest in rejecting that mindset. But then secondly, and this is really important, we've been the campaign that has articulated a holistic response to how we get to genuine public safety. And this is a big factor in why I decided to run. As an educator, you see how all the systems impact kids and families. Do they have health care? Can their parents find a good job? Are they food insecure? And governors are uniquely positioned to see how those issues are all interconnected. Mm-hmm. And we've proposed a path forward that sees those interconnections, that realizes that when folks don't have affordable childcare, they can't stay in the workforce. And when they can't stay in the workforce, their families struggle economically. And when their families struggle economically, they are more vulnerable to living in conditions that might lead to ending up dealing with crime and violence. Right? We've been the campaign to say, there's a deep connection between transportation and access to opportunity. Yeah. We've been the campaign to say there's a deep connection between access to health care and people's ability to get the mental health services that are crucial for their well-being. And so, no other candidate and no other campaign in this race has called for truly universal health care in Maryland. No other candidate supports Medicare for all. No other candidate testified on a bill that would take Maryland towards single-payer universal health care. We've been leading on that because we understand if folks can't get mental health care, if they can't get reproductive care, their quality of life is diminished, and all of our quality of lives are diminished.
Yeah.
Michelle, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, it's just like John was saying, and like I was saying earlier, it's the work that both of us have done shows just how critical it is that we take that holistic approach to the challenges facing Maryland families. And we were also, we're both coming from an advocacy kind of background. That is the work that I've been doing. I've been advocating to make this system more just. I've been advocating and trying to, bring folks to the table and make sure that those voices are being heard. I don't like to say that I'm the voice for people. I just try and clear a path for those voices to get to where they need to be and to be in front. And we're very committed to making sure that we have people at the table that have been directly impacted. And I think it is critical that we continue to lift up their voices and that we continue to question the status quo when it comes to, everything, including how, like we said earlier, we've got a good abortion statute on the books here, but that's not enough. It's not enough to be just pro-choice. We need to be actively advocating for abortion access. And so it's taking that next step.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank both of you, John and Michelle, for first of all allowing me to be part of this. I want to thank you so deeply for being really the only campaign that is even considering establishing a statewide conviction and sentencing integrity review unit. And yes, 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 please, I would love to be part of that and help in any way I can. And I just want to wrap up by telling folks why I decided to endorse John and Michelle. I had mentioned at the top, but I'm going to repeat this again, that this is my first ever official public endorsement. I have not ever publicly endorsed anybody for any political office other than tweeting, retweeting somebody, but not really given a statement like this. I'm not generally a political person. But as both of you know, advocacy on most policy issues, you cannot divorce from politics. And I also know that it's easy for anyone to talk the talk. It's easy to draft up a bunch of plans for a political platform. But not everybody has walked the walk. And I really do believe, and I've seen that, John and Michelle have walked the walk. And I'm supporting them not only because of what I think they can do for the future of Maryland, but because just as importantly, because of what they've already done, in the past for the state and for so many communities. So again, thank you. I am honored to be here to support you guys. You have both dedicated your lives to social justice equity, and I'm asking all Marylanders to turn out to vote on Tuesday, July 19th for a primary and to vote for John and Michelle. If you want to sign up to volunteer, you can text VOL to 48178. Again, it's text VOL to 48178. And if you both want to say maybe 30 seconds to close out, that'd be great.
I'll just say really quickly, Rabia, we are so very grateful for your support, and I am very excited to look forward to partnering with you and continuing to fight these good fights with you.
Absolutely. I'd echo that. Really look forward to building the conviction and sentencing integrity unit together. And Rabia, I just want to say, your courageous, fierce advocacy for justice, it's inspiring. And, it's an honor to have your support because of who you are in the world and the way that you've tried to move Maryland and our country towards greater justice. And so I look forward to, together with you and Michelle, trying to move our state forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good luck. A few more
Thank
days.
you.
Bye, guys.